Ruthie Stringer, and this is my collaborator, Dana Bishop-Root. And I feel really fortunate that we and our other collaborator, Leslie, live together in one house in just outside of Pittsburgh. So imagine Andrew Carnegie's first library. That's the slide that was meant to be on the screen. It was built in 1889. It's the first library that Andrew Carnegie built in the United States, in the town where his first steel mill is also located. Our region experienced a huge industrial boom in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and then a steep economic decline beginning in the 60s as a result of deindustrialization, suburbanization, and governmental negligence towards poor people and people of color. The library was closed and slated for demolition in the early 1970s, but was saved by a group of committed neighborhood residents whose long-term collective work we are indebted to. Our work in the library aims to support this deep investment by facilitating expression, communication, and resource exchange, expanding the library's collections, and creating positions for artists and arts and culture workers from our neighborhood. This is a public library. We are grateful for the opportunity to think and work through the meanings of the publicness of this place with you today, and we're humbled and inspired by the company that we're keeping.
So the library is really big. It takes up about a block of space. So just to kind of get an idea about this like very huge, imposing building that's also very much the center of a neighborhood. The library is a place with multiple histories. These are specific and local and also connected to other places across the country. There is strength in identity and there is strength in connection. The library has always declared itself to be free and in service to the minds and spirits of its users. But its publicness was historically different for managers in the mill and mill workers, different for white users and black workers and black users. The building holds these histories. Inside its publicness, we can acknowledge our multiple pasts as part of our presence. We also bring our own histories into our work. Mine, Ruthie's, our third collaborator, Leslie's. The public and public library calls us to participate with the library as a place that has expansive room for collaboration and multiplicity of voice, and the capacity to open its doors wider and wider. It is a place for gathering. It operates with a structure and value system that diverges from white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Its existence, dependent as it is upon the community-based work that saved it from demolition, demonstrates that there are other ways to organize ourselves and produce knowledge together. The library is an archive, a collection of collections, a place we can give presence to our histories and expand our collaborations.
Our first immersion in this public was the implementation of the neighborhood print shop. We met Mike Tobias, owner of local business Dipcraft Manufacturing, when we approached him to ask permission for the artist Maya Hayek to paint a mural on one of his warehouses as part of a larger project we were working on throughout our neighborhood. He offered us several pieces of screen printing equipment that he had previously used as part of his business on the condition that we make it accessible to the public. We proposed an exchange with the library in which we would use space in part of the building that had been closed and in turn offer programming. Our experiences as designers, printmakers, and educators in other print shops initially determined how we imagined that the studio would be used. We didn't realize that we were presuming a familiarity with the process and assigning a value to it that was based on our existing practices. For about a year, we struggled to make the studio a place that felt public. A shift happened as we built relationships and realized that we'd been presenting the printing process itself as a resource, as the resource, as in, come print here. As we became more familiar with the needs and desires of individuals and organizations in our neighborhood, we shifted the way that we presented the studio, recentering its purpose as a means of communication. This may seem like a subtle distinction, but it changed the culture of the space and our usership expanded dramatically. The shop's been open for 7 years. It offers a weekly open studio, a guided design studio, youth out-of-school time programming, an autonomous open studio run by and for young adult users, a technician training program, a mini residency program for regional artists, and a resident artist in residence program for an artist from our library service area to pursue a long-term independent artistic investigation.
This is an installation made by our first resident artist in residence, James Kidd. He has been making art in Braddock for over 50 years. He has also become one of our frequent collaborators. Resident Artist in Residence flips the model of a residency that takes an artist outside of their place in order to create space for art making and instead makes space within the artist's own neighborhood. It asserts that there is a value in being from a place, working from a place. It demonstrates that art is part of all of our communities and that there are always artists present in them. In addition to artists, there are also other roles to fill in a neighborhood arts ecology. Other cultural work is also necessary and is happening. Not just for the benefit of our neighborhood, the cultural knowledge production of our neighborhood is in dialogue with dominant or mainstream arts discourses, and these discourses are impoverished without the voice of our neighbors. Leading up to the 2013 Carnegie International, we were asked to propose a project with a larger scope and budget than anything we had ever done up to that point. We developed an art lending collection that would make works available for checkout the same way you would check out a book. A core component of this project was the creation of paid positions for 3 arts and culture workers from our neighborhood who would assist patrons in selecting artwork, plan arts-related programming, and guide the collection as it expands to ensure that it remains relevant to the neighborhood in which it exists. This job description right here, we're happy to email copies, is the way that the initial arts and culture facilitator position has grown over the past several years. Initially, we started with 3 part-time positions at $12 per hour. During the first year, the positions were held by Mary Carey, Jonathan Reyes, and Devron Daly. Currently, Mary Carey and Jonathan Reyes have transitioned to 2 full-time positions. Structurally, the arts and culture facilitator position develops multiple leadership roles from the beginning of the project. It values the knowledge and expertise of neighborhood residents who have the complex ability to connect the experiences and interests of other residents and expand upon existing art-space dialogues. It removes the limit of university education or an extensive existing art-space social network, as these limits contribute to the underrepresentation of poor and working class people and people of color from the dominant arts economy. It resists an idea that has been aggressively applied to our neighborhood and many others, that art is something that is brought in from the outside as a tool for revitalization, economic development, and erasure. Alongside the arts and culture facilitator position, the other core structural component of the project was building the collection through the participation of multiple curators. Honoring existing critical aesthetic practices in our neighborhood, we invited 3 library patrons with whom we have ongoing arts discourses to each develop a collection of artwork. We as Transformazium created a collection of work by artists we have worked with, and the Carnegie Museum facilitated the donation of a collection of artworks from nearly all of the artists represented in the 2013 International.
Regis Welsh is a writer and critic. He donated a collection of posters of mostly impressionist artwork that he's collected and lived with for several decades. They show signs of wear, tack holes, tape marks, and discoloration, which adds his presence to the original work. James Kidd, our first resident artist in residence, donated a group of works that he'd collected, as well as works that he's made. These are some of the works from Transformazium's collection, which honors our influences and collaborators. This is a group from Ray Henderson's collection. Mr. Henderson owned an art gallery in Braddock in the 90s, which is a time when our neighborhood is often described as having no cultural production. It's defined only in relationship to poverty and decline. Mr. Henderson remembers when, as a little boy, he would run down the hill on Saturdays to the library to check out 3 books for the week. He remembers when he was not allowed in certain areas of the library because he's Black. He was part of the group of residents who came together and saved the library from demolition. His collection works against the erasure of all of these histories. This is a selection of work from the International. Our partnership with the Carnegie Museum will continue with the addition of works from the 2018 International. The museum continues to participate with the art lending collection because it offers to them a way to make their exhibitions into experiential public archives. These images show some of the ways that the art lending collection is used as a place for group learning, private contemplation, public presentations, choice making, and knowledge production. During the International, library patrons could choose works from the collection to be hung in the Carnegie Museum, moving the discourse of our neighborhood into the museum. Our art lending facilitators also created programs. Mary Carey guided the first major expansion of the collection. She worked with incarcerated artists at South Fayette Correctional Facility who donated over 20 new works to the collection. Devron Daly held a photo contest, and Mary also regularly hangs artwork in local businesses.
The Winged Messenger returns. This is a sculpture that Andrew Carnegie gave to the library. This picture was taken in 1903. The sculpture was stolen from the building when it closed in the early 70s. The group of neighbors who we talked about earlier who reopened the library also worked with the FBI for 20 years to track down the sculpture and return it. When we were developing the art lending collection, we did not see this existing piece of artwork or consider it as part of the art lending collection because we were more focused on the contemporary discourse that our library patrons were producing around arts and culture. The Winged Messenger's history of being and not being seen, being and not being in the library, is a reminder for us that artworks need to be activated by people to produce new knowledge and keep multiple histories present. It is a reminder to us to return intentionally to what exists. In order to make sure that complex ongoing projects can be supported by the library and add to its capacity, much of our work as artists has become administrative. We're not complaining. From budget to how programming decisions are made, we are working towards ways to share the energy, the multiplicity of voice, the answerability, and visibility of choice that we have cultivated together as an expansive library community.
For a little more than a year, my job at the library as adult services manager has included purchasing new books, audio, and DVDs for the collection. It's also impacted the way that Leslie and Dana and I do our work. Recently, we've been working to apply the principles that guided the development of the collections of artwork for the art lending collection to book purchasing, multiplying the voices represented by inviting outside choosers, asserting that the subjective experiences and intellectual work of individuals must be recognized within our collective human project of discourse and knowledge production, proposing that we can better understand our relationships to collections when it is made explicit that they are chosen by people, could be chosen differently by different people or more people. We did this in a limited way at the beginning of the art lending collection. We had a small budget for buying books to complement the art lending collection, and we asked artists and writers and cultural workers to give us recommendations. This is a list of books that Hannah Jickling and Helen Reed sent us. They were added to our collection. And relationships can be made between these books that we purchased and the ones that existed in our collection already, but that was not an intentional part of that project. So aiming to be more explicit about intentional relationships between what exists and what is not yet present, we are currently inviting artists, cultural workers, educators, and curators whose work is guided by social justice to examine our collection as it exists, pull out books that they want to call attention to, and also call attention to the holes in the collection. There are always holes to fill, and each one of us would find different ones. The practice of making what is absent visible is essential to us to ensure the presence of a multiplicity of ideas, histories, ways of learning, and desires.
This is a group made by Kalolo Luckett, which uses the form of a library display. The cards are placeholders for the books she found to be missing that were then purchased and added. We also want to facilitate the movement of collections from our library to other places. This book list shows books we purchased to support librarian artist Becca Zela Mguni's Black Unicorn Room reading project. These books, along with books Becca Zela chose from our existing collection, which center and celebrate Black women's stories and queer and gender non-conforming her stories, traveled to several pop-up library sites and then returned to our library. And currently, we are working with resident artist and residence Tyrone Brown to interact with Tyrone Brown. This is one of his art pieces here, to interact with and add to existing works in the collection. Tyrone is developing an audiobook collection of works by the philosopher Nietzsche, which will circulate as part of the library collection. And finally, we are welcoming 4 other artists from many residencies to produce new work and develop the library collections and explicit installations, starting with Daryl Kinzel in late September. This is a piece of his work.